They actually gave us each a whole fish. There is actually meat inside. Vegetarians beware. It appeared that the chef in this quarantine facility had gone on strike. Hi everybody, Dr. Yu here, with my reactions as a family doctor to the quarantine food I was offered during my 10 days in Shanghai quarantine. This is part 3 of my video series on Zero COVID China. For more on what life was like during quarantine for me, you can check out the video on the top right corner of your screen. Now, in my work as a family doctor, my role is to prevent disease, so I give dietary advice to my patients all the time. Here I'll show you my take on the quarantine food. Let's get right to it. So my first meal of quarantine has arrived, and it's one of the traditional Chinese lunchboxes with rice as the main dish, and several side dishes to complement the rice. At this point in my travels, I hadn't slept for over 35 hours. That's almost a day and a half. So I was super sleepy, and of course, when you're sleep deprived, you're less in control of what and how much you eat. So I actually didn't care what was in this. I was starving and ate the whole thing. The vegetables in the top left were tasteless, but I was happy for the fiber intake. The tofu thing on the top right here was tasty, but also filling. I also had no idea what the other two dishes were, but I didn't care. Note that my way of thinking here is a recipe for disaster if the sleep deprivation was chronic. And by chronic, I mean over more than a few days, as that could cause some serious weight gain, not to mention other bad health effects. See my video on sleep to learn more. Here's the thing about me. I love Chinese breakfast, especially the large balls filled with pork, the soupy xiaolongbao, the giant chive dumplings, and the special preserved meat that I've only had in China. I do tend to eat a big breakfast in China, but I deal with it by going for a run each morning before eating all of this. Contrast that with the disappointment served to us here. We had a box of congee, basically hot wet rice, which I didn't bother taking a picture of, as well as this dry balzi with mostly bun and a little bit of mystery meat, a hard-boiled egg that was remarkably difficult to peel, and 2 mini xiaomai, which were the only 2 items with flavor in this box, and not nearly enough to be filling. Health-wise, definitely not good either, especially without the cardio workout beforehand. Lunch was more delicious and more balanced. We got some nice Chinese squash here, some stir-fried Chinese veggies with meat here, and a bit of tofu here for both vegetable and protein. I'd say this is the first meal so far that meets the Canada's Food Guide's recommendation of having 50% of each meal be either vegetables or fruit. We'll see how many more meals in quarantine meets that simple standard. Dinner on day 2. Not as healthy as lunch, but still tasty given that I hadn't eaten real Chinese food in ages. We got some deep-fried meat sticks that had gone soggy on the top right, some egg cabbage stir-fry, a soupy dish of diced carrots and corn, and some kind of tomato sauce. But the best had to be these 2 fish balls here. Delicious. Given that I'd eaten 2 meals filled with carbohydrate already, this much rice was definitely not something I was looking for. But for 2 days at least, I was happy to follow the traveler's rule of thumb of eating what the locals eat, regardless of the health consequences. Day 3's breakfast was more diverse. There was a typical congee, but this time the other box of egg and carbs contained another carb item, huajuan, which is a salty twist of dough with green onions inside. The only vegetable to be seen, other than the cabbage leaves here, that are meant to simply preserve the moisture, and yes, if you are curious, I did actually eat the cabbage leaves, since gotta have my daily vegetable quota. But the other neat thing is that they started to include a milk and a bun. The bun would come and go, just the typical bun you'd find on an airplane, but they would include at least a milk for the remainder of the breakfasts. This was good, because I was starting to wonder how I'd get sufficient calcium and vitamin D during this day here, not being allowed to go outside and all. We all need about 1,200 milligrams of calcium, and at least 1,000 international units of vitamin D per day. From the milk carton, it only provides about 15% of that. Maybe we'll have to start eating the shrimp skin next time we get that shrimp. Now, as a doctor, I'm not sure if this Oreo bar here is meant to be a goodwill gesture for the overall blandness of the breakfast, or an insult to injury given how much carbs I've already ingested. Regardless, I ate it, enjoyed its deliciousness, and felt very guilty after. Day 3's lunch was heavenly. Fresh baby bamboo shoots are an excellent source of both fiber and tastiness, and the meat in these meat dishes were tender and juicy. I do have to point out though, Chinese food is notoriously salty. Don't eat this particular meal if you have high blood pressure, heart failure, or kidney disease. My cardiology and nephrology friends will appreciate me saying this. Day 3's dinner was in the same old box meal format, And again, I appreciate the green vegetable dish on the bottom right here. Some of the dishes are starting to repeat themselves, such as the fish with pickled veggies on the top right, and this lump of tofu on the bottom. But wait, is it tofu? On closer examination, we can see that there is actually meat inside, tasting like ground pork with green onion, stuffed into this tofu. Vegetarians beware. Chinese food will challenge you to no end. On day 4, it appeared that the chef in his quarantine facility had gone on strike. Maybe they were aware of the many complaints they've received from cooking bland breakfasts. To compensate, it appears that the facility is making up for the unhealthiness by serving us something even more unhealthy: a loaf of plain cake and 2 croissants. That was it. Now, I always try to find the positives in everything, and so I want to show you something interesting about these croissants. It's classic Chinese baking to include a bit of cooked meat in the bread, just to give it more flavor. Of course, it's not real cooked meat, more like a slice of fried spam, but it was tasty. And at least it was a change from the usual wet rice and dry baozi. Regardless, if you're ever looking for a time to start intermittent fasting, do a quarantine in Shanghai. Lunch was perhaps the healthiest meal I've had in quarantine. Light cabbage, tofu rolls, egg fried tomatoes, and shrimp. Nothing too salty or heavy. Just cut out about half the rice here, and it would fit the Canada Food Guide nicely. By the way, when I try to tell my Chinese patients about the Canada Food Guide and having them cut down on rice, they stare at me like I'm crazy and ask, "No rice? But what do you eat to not be hungry?" Day 4's dinner continued to improve from the morning's breakfast. I appreciated the diverse ways that Chinese cooking can cook vegetables. There's at least 6 different types of vegetables in this meal. You've got the garlic shoots on the bottom left, the spinach and mushrooms on the top left, the carrot in the middle, and at least 2 different kinds of crunchy and delicious mystery vegetables on the top right. There's a reason I haven't been constipated yet on this trip. Did you know that an adult human requires at least 35 grams of fiber per day for healthy bowel movements? Oh, by the way, if you're eating as you watch this, forgive me. We doctors talk poop all the time, especially over a good meal. Breakfast on day 5 was interesting because it seemed to contain a peace offering from the chef to apologize for being on strike the day before. This black dessert-looking thing that seemed to be a red bean cake on first glance. On closer examination, it really wasn't red bean, it was just sticky rice. Black sticky rice, but sticky rice nonetheless. And yes, it tasted exactly like rice, just stickier than usual. Disappointing. Sometimes people add sugar to sticky rice cakes, but not in this case. And as a doctor, as much as I hate sugar, I would have welcomed it in this case. Sorry, chef, my heart has not been won back. By the way, having 2 of the same baozi doesn't make each any healthier or taste any better. If anything, it's double the unhealthy carb load. And unlike food channels on YouTube, I'm not opening these buns because there is really nothing in them. The meat in them is so small and dry that it really would be more of a disappointment and a waste of your time to see me opening them, and your time is too valuable for that. Day 5's lunch was similarly disappointing. A breaded chicken thigh, basically the same type of meat, just in 2 different sauces, and the pumpkin seems to be the only vegetable here. Now, unlike Day 5's lunch, what wouldn't be disappointing is if you could give this video a like and subscribe to my channel, so more people can find this video and differentiate healthy from unhealthy eating, especially if they also have to be quarantined. So thanks for hitting that like and subscribe buttons. Day 5's dinner was much better from a health standpoint. We got not 1, but 2 sets of vegetable dishes, bell pepper and cabbage, along with chopped lettuce stems. Yes, lettuce stems, not leaves in these dishes. The lettuce stem is what you get when you let a head of lettuce grow to maturity. By the way, I know I'm a stickler for vegetables and healthy eating, but I promise I'm really not an unpleasant person to have a meal with. Preaching healthy eating habits is just part of my day job, and I'm very passionate about it. See my videos about family medicine to learn more about what being a family doctor entails. Breakfast on day 6. We got a different type of baozi, smaller and yellow, and contains what seems like either a yam or a fruit paste filling. I wasn't sure, but it's still just as unremarkable as the baozi in previous breakfasts. And remember the huajuan from a previous breakfast? These 2 flat pieces of steamed buns here look exactly like huajuan, just squished flat. You see, the reason I'm complaining about these carbohydrate-heavy breakfasts is because the starches in the dough and the rice just get digested into simple sugars once it's in the intestines. And so to the body, eating this is very similar to eating a bunch of candy bars. Sure, there is less of an immediate sugar rush with these starches, because the digestion of starches takes more time, but it's just as large a hit of simple sugars as far as your pancreas is concerned, and it increases your risk of obesity and type 2 diabetes. And let's be clear, I'm not against all carbohydrates. We all need sufficient amounts of carbohydrates in our diet, as per the Canada Food Guide. But it doesn't have to be 80% to 90% of each meal. And if it has to be, at least give us carbohydrates that we like. I must have been so depressed by the continued onslaught of tasteless carbohydrates at breakfast that I forgot to take a photo of day 6 lunch. But here's a video of me unboxing day 6 dinner to make up for it. I love this. It's got great vegetables. Nice eggplant dish here. Amazing Chinese celery stir fry with Whittier fungus. And again, delicious cured meat. Amazing. On day 7, the chef must have telepathically heard my complaints about breakfast, because it came with another surprise, this time a good surprise. Yes, I continued to eat the cabbage leaves, but this time, underneath the cabbage leaves, was a gift of sweet potatoes. Now, sweet potatoes are some of the healthiest things to eat. Not only is the meat sweet and tasty, but both the meat and the skin are an excellent source of fiber and would definitely minimize your risk of constipation. Lunch continued to be good, with these delicious baby bamboo shoots you know I love. And dinner was especially fancy, because you see here that they're not only including a healthy vegetable, Chinese bok choy, but they actually gave us each a whole fish. Now, unfortunately for people who love fish, please keep in mind that fish in China is full of bones. I actually didn't end up eating much of this, and what I did eat, I suffered through. I must have picked out over 100 bones, some of them were less than half a centimeter long, and I just gave up by the end and ate the bones without picking them out. I made myself feel better by telling myself that I had just got my 1200 milligrams of calcium per day just from these bones alone. Day 8 had the same depressing breakfast, so there's no need to waste your time showing you a photo. Instead, since we just ate mouthfuls of bony fish last night, let's show you some of the drinks we had in quarantine to wash the bones away. The one on the left is Bayberry Juice, which is a special type of berry that we just don't see much in the West, but is sweet and delicious. It just has a pit on the inside, so be careful if you're eating it. The juice tasted really good and authentic. On the other hand, the pomegranate juice was basically chemical water with flavorings that tasted vaguely sweet and nothing like pomegranate. And I haven't even shown you the grapefruit juice, which is basically just chemicals and doesn't deserve a photo. For health purposes, I highly recommend not drinking these if you're in quarantine, but definitely try the bayberry juice if you ever get a chance to. Keep in mind, juices are not substitutes for water though, and most people should still make sure that you get your daily amount of recommended water intake. In case you're curious, the stuff behind the juice containers are salted duck eggs. This is what we're given during breakfast to mix with the congee to give it flavor. Unfortunately, each of these packs over half the daily recommended intake of salt, so eat these at your peril. Again, public service announcement for my cardiology and nephrology colleagues: don't eat these salted duck eggs if you have kidney disease, high blood pressure, or heart failure. Lunch was the usual healthy mixture of fiber and calcium supplementation, with our excellent bok choy and Whittier fungus, as well as shrimp skin. And yes, I did start to eat the shrimp skin by this point. Dinner was mystery meat, but still sufficient amounts of vegetables with the cauliflower, carrots, soybean, and tomatoes. You'll notice I don't talk too much about fat or cholesterol in these videos describing quarantine food. This is because fats and oils, when they're eaten in moderate amounts, actually doesn't contribute as much to body fat and cardiovascular disease as much as excessive consumption of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, once they're digested, are actually converted into fats in the body if they're not immediately used. And so excessive amounts of carbohydrate consumption is essentially the main cause of obesity and diabetes. And one's cholesterol level, which is a marker of cardiovascular disease, is actually determined more by one's genetics than by the amount of cholesterol actually eaten. That's a fact that always surprises and delights some of my patients, but still it doesn't mean that we can go out and eat whatever we want. It's just that your body's blood cholesterol levels are controlled more by your genetics as opposed to your diet. By now you'll have noticed a pattern of just how colorful Chinese boxed meals are. Here we have some spinach, cauliflower, and peppers, some pickled Chinese vegetables in the middle, and some chicken on the top right. In fact, a quick way to check that you're getting a balanced diet is to look at your plate and see how colorful it is. If it's really colorful, with lots of not just greens, but also reds, purples, yellows, and oranges, and different shades of each color, then you know you have a balanced meal. And yes, black can be a color, as we see for Chinese Whittier fungus during day 9's dinner. It's very healthy and very tasty, when it's cooked right. If there's one thing Western cooking can learn from Chinese cooking, it's how they cook their meats. I initially didn't think much of the meat at the top right, but on closer inspection, it was a piece of chicken that was cooked to fall off the bone perfection and marinated with an amazingly aromatic sauce. A quick anatomy lesson for you. Bones aren't just calcium. They're living things, constantly changing, and contain a lot of nutrients. So when you cook meat with bone inside, it makes the meat that much more flavorful. The Asian cultures know this, and so that's why there's always bones in these dishes. So much tastier than a bland piece of chicken breast. Breakfast was again unremarkable on day 10, but lunch was perhaps the best meal I've had to conclude the Shanghai quarantine. Broccoli, which I consider to be the healthiest vegetable, as well as 3 uniquely delicious types of meat. Not sure if one is duck or one is pork or chicken, but they were all mouth-wateringly perfect. I'm sorry this isn't a food channel, so I won't describe it further, but let me just say I did not care how healthy these meats were, they were that delicious. Now, I was so excited about leaving by day 10 that I forgot to take a photo of day 10's dinner. Rest assured it didn't beat lunch. Also, since I was leaving the morning of the 11th day, I decided to take my own advice regarding intermittent fasting and cancel my breakfast for that morning. It not only made me feel healthier, it also earned me a 20 yuan refund. Speaking of cost, this is how much the overall trip cost me. Per day, breakfast was 20 yuan, or $3. Lunch was 40 yuan, or $6, and dinner was 40 yuan, or $6. The total food cost per day ended up being 100 yuan, or $15. If you think about it, this is a great bargain, as you can barely get a good breakfast in America for $15. Housing per day was 260 yuan, which is actually expensive by Chinese standards, but fortunately it comes to $38. Total cost per day ended up being 360 yuan, and the total cost for a 10-day quarantine period would be that multiplied by 10, making it 3,600 yuan, or a total of $525. So overall, my advice on surviving hotel quarantine: think of quarantine as a hotel-based vacation, where you undergo a cultural immersion in the local cuisine with free room service. If you get sick of quarantine, just remind yourself of how good it feels to not have to cook by yourself. And watch your salt and carb intake. And make sure to get enough fiber to ward off the constipation. So that's it from me today. If you like this video, please feel free to check out the other videos in my Zero COVID China series. And subscribe to my channel so you can be alerted to when the 4th video comes out about what it's like right now to live in Zero COVID China. Thanks everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy.